In both the Poetic Edda and in the accounts of the Roman Saxo Grammaticus, the divine triplets Odin, Vili, and Ve created the world and humanity. They killed the giant Ymir and used his body to make the world. But today, everyone knows who Odin is. But what about Vili and Ve? I'll provide a chart and a map to help us compare and identify their possible epithets in Norse, Germanic, Indo-European, and beyond. Let's investigate. In my table, we've got Odin, Vili, and Ve with the meaning of their names in parentheses. These are also the three qualities that they gave to humankind, which we'll explore in a second. The first set of epithets that I'll add here are not controversial, since they're also from the Poetic Edda in the Völuspá poem. Odin, Hœnirand, and Lóðurr. Walking along the seashore, the three brothers found two driftwoods, one from an ash tree, the other from an elm tree. They carved them into a man and a woman, Ask and Embla, respectively. Then the three brothers each gave them a gift. Odin gave us the breath of life, or Óðir, our inspiration, or spirit. Thenceforth, when people gave their last breath and their odor escaped them, Odin, with his hounds, would herd them into the west every night to retire in the underworld. Or his Valkyries would gather the worthiest to Valhalla. Vili gave us will and intellect. His epithet, Hœnir, means stork, and might likewise relate to the transmigration of souls across the sky, but at dawn, carried by storks to their new bodies, as has been preserved in European folklore to this day. And Ve, or Lóðurr, gave us blood, beauty, and possibly movement, although sometimes Hœnir is credited with granting movement, but since blood circulation is required for movement, and it's the final act of bringing humans to life, I prefer to see it as a gift from Lóðurr. Unlike Odin and Hœnir, Lóðurr doesn't seem to be tasked with the transmigration of souls, but with the living body. This, perhaps, is why Ve was most associated with sacred groves, temples, and governments, which were concerned with embodiment practices and the cycles of the earth, long before the ascetic philosophies of the Axial Age took over religion, making it about afterlives and cosmic abstractions. Altogether, the divine triplets provided the spirit, mind, and body to humanity. In a ballad from the Faroe Islands called the Lokatator, Odin, Hœnir, and Loki each try their hand at saving a farmer's son from a giant. In the end, Loki succeeded in tricking and killing the giant. This same triad of Odin, Hœnir, and Loki is also mentioned in another poem of the Prose Edda. This strongly suggests that Lóðurr was an epithet of Loki. Like Ask and Embla, Odin and Vili are associated with specific trees, the oak and the willow. I couldn't find a tree that Ve or Lóðurr was associated with, so I searched for the most important trees in Germanic tradition. Yggdrasil is an ash tree, then there's elm, oak, willow, as we've mentioned, linden, yew, hazelnut, spruce, rowan, alder, and birch. Of these, the birch tree is associated with Loki. The origins of Loki are interesting. His mother, Laufey, meaning leafy, is speculated to have been a tree goddess or forest fairy. His father, Farbauti, meaning dangerous or sudden striker, is speculated to have been a Jotun of storms. Presumably, his lightning struck a tree, and that tree burst into flames, and Loki emerged. This speculative origin is evidenced by Loki's metaphorical association with the chaotic characteristics of fire in many of his myths. Modern Lokian practitioners also emphasize fire in his rituals and depictions. Farbauti was mentioned by name in a few different places by Germanic warriors in particular, implying that he was an important god in his own right. The meaning of his name is identical with the Balto-Slavic storm god Perkunas, striker, and even with an epithet of Zeus, Terpi Keranos, or who enjoys lightning. That Thor is usually the equivalent of Perkunas in Norse myth implies that Farbauti was either a far older god, as being a Jotun would suggest, or a foreign god, perhaps from the Baltic or Eurasian steppe. The meaning of Loki's name is highly debated. It could be knot, tangle, cobweb, spider, lock, ending, lofty, light, or flame. The spider connotations remind me of the trickster spider Anansi of Akan folklore in West Africa and Nigeria. The fiery connotations, on the other hand, remind me of the fiery trickster messenger of Nigeria, Elegba, or obviously more likely the Hindu fire messenger, Agni, whose epithet is Lohita. This implies that Loki might stem, at least in part, from Indo-European mythology, like Agni in India and Engi in Illyria. In one story, Thor and Loki traveled to the mysterious Jotun castle of Utgard. There they competed in contests of strength and skill with various Jotun. Loki competed with his fiery linguistic counterpart, Halogi, at an eating contest, wherein Halogi wins by burning the food. After losing several contests, Thor was furious, but the castle disappeared before he could wreak havoc upon it. The lord of the castle was called Utgard Loki, and is generally suspected to have been Loki himself in disguise. A Latinized form of Utgard Loki's name, Ugarthilocus, was also mentioned by Saxo Grammaticus in the Middle Ages, and was conflated by him with Prometheus as a fiery trickster archetype. Farbauti is also said in the Prose Edda to have two other sons, the enigmatic brothers of Loki, Helblindi and Belister. Helblindi, or Blinder of Hela, was an epithet of Odin, who, hearing prophecy of Loki's children Jormungandr, Fenrir, and Hela causing calamity, banished them into Niflheim, the dark, abyssal underworld, where no light reached. Thus he blinded Hela by banishing her and her kin to where no light could reach. Belister's name, however, is not entirely agreed upon. It could mean stormbreaker, as in a break in the storm clouds, or conversely it could mean violent storm, or even some suggest beekeeper. Nonetheless, since Loki and Odin are accounted for in this triad, we might assume that Belister was an epithet of Hœnir. The parents of Odin, Hœnir, and Lóðurr were Bor and Bestla. One possible interpretation of Bestla's name is bark, thus relating her to a tree, like Laufey, and some suspect that it might be a reference to Yggdrasil. Bor, on the other hand, was associated with winter, cold, ice, and mountains, thus resembling a winter god like Boreas more than a storm god like Farbauti. Separately, Halogi, the fiery Jotun version of Loki we just mentioned, was the son of the mysterious Fornjot, or Bullthorn, evil thorn. He is generally understood to be a king of Gotland and Finland, even though the meaning of his name resembles an epithet of Laufey, Nal, or needle. Simultaneously, Bullthorn was said to be the father or grandfather of Bestla and Mimir, Mimir being the wizard uncle of Odin, Vili, and Ve. So I'm not sure what's going on here. What do you think? An important pattern that I'm recognizing here with my comparative mythology brain brings me to Perkunas and Velnias in Lithuanian mythology. Velnias, the god of death, who has the same psychopomp job as Odin, is constantly fleeing from Perkunas by shape-shifting into various animals and hiding in trees. Thus, Perkunas often strikes trees with his thunderbolts, but the cunning Velnias always escapes. Perhaps we might think of Odin, Vili, and Loki as three aspects of the same Velnias, who, likewise in Slavic myth, is called Veles. I will come back to this premise later. Next, let's follow a few more epithets of Utgard Loki, which are quite intriguing. There's Skrimir, who accompanies Thor and Loki as their guide to Utgard, but was revealed at the end to be Loki in disguise. Then there's Sutungir, sometimes conflated with Utgard Loki, who avenged his father's death by the dwarves Galar and Fjalar, and stole the mead of poetry from them, which was later stolen in kind by Odin, then redistributed to humankind for poetic inspiration. This gets even more confusing when another epithet of Utgard Loki was identified by Snorri Sturluson, the writer-compiler of the Prose Edda, with Fjalar, the red rooster who is prophesied to herald Ragnarok for the Jotuns. This rooster Fjalar does not seem to be the same as the dwarf Fjalar, but I found some curious connections on this particular rabbit hole. So, the dwarf brothers, Galar and Fjalar, killed Kvasir, a god of genius and poetic inspiration who, before being martyred, was spreading knowledge and civilization across the globe. I wonder if he might relate to similar messenger gods in other mythologies, like Kvasir in Georgian or Kartvelian mythology, or Triptolemus in Greek. Galar and Fjalar use his blood to brew the mead of poetry, thus distilling his wisdom into an elixir of intellectual and poetic inspiration. This mirrors the creation of humans in the myths of Mesopotamia, where Geshtu, or Iluwela, the Sumerian and Akkadian god of intellect, was sacrificed by Enki and Mami, who then sculpted humans out of his blood and clay to become slaves of the gods. These acts of creation by Kvasir, Galar, and Fjalar, Geshtu, Enki, and Mami, or Odin, Vili, and Ve, definitely resemble one another, but not quite enough. The most curious link that I've found in my research has to do with the two roosters that crow to warn their respective masters that Ragnarok is coming. The red rooster, Fjalar, whose name means deceiver, is in Jotunheim, and is often associated with either Utgard Loki or Loki himself. This, perhaps, is where we might find the strongest parallels between Loki and Satan, Lucifer, Abraxas, or the Demiurge in Satanic, Luciferian, and Gnostic syncretic traditions. The other golden rooster, Gullinkambi, in Valhalla, is prophesied to crow at the onset of Ragnarok, his warning presumably coinciding with the very same warning that Heimdall is prophesied to give with his loud horn when the Jotuns attack. Heimdall is directly associated with this rooster. Furthermore, it is Loki and Heimdall who are destined to kill one another during Ragnarok. Even more coincidental, the name of Heimdall's horn, which he uses to signal Ragnarok, is Galarhorn, or loud horn, the very same meaning of the dwarf Galar's name, loud. But there is a third rooster who crows for Ragnarok. He's mentioned briefly as a soot-red rooster, who we could translate in Old Norse as something like Sotraudur. He lives in hell and will awaken the dead. Since Odin of the three is most associated with death, we might imagine Sotraudur in the first column. Now, let's call back to my hypothesis of Velnias or Veles being a triple god of Odin, Vili, and Loki. In the Prose Edda, a Vanir king, Gylfi, seeks counsel with the Aesir in Asgard. In the palace, he meets with three kings, with their thrones stacked on top of one another. These are Harr, Jafnhar, and Thridi. High, just as high, and third. The four kings go on to trade stories and prophecies with one another, ultimately intimidating Gylfi into submitting to the Aesir. It is suspected that Odin put on this ruse, projecting himself as three different kings. But elsewhere, it is understood that Asgard is ruled by 3 kings. Odin, of course, was the most important, but whenever Odin wandered the earth, as he often does, Vili and Ve would rule in his stead, even taking Frigga as their wife. Perhaps they were Jafnhar and Thridi, or perhaps Vili and Ve were always aspects of Odin. So, we've established some interesting connections within differing Norse sources, but what other sources can we find for the divine triplets motif? Before Odin, Vili, and Ve, there was Buri, or his son Bor, and Ymir. Buri and Ymir were both born, it seems, from the divine cow Audumbla, or were otherwise thawed out of icy glaciers. Although they are not considered related, they both drank milk from Audumla's udder, and so I like to think of them as divine twins, like Romulus and Remus, who both drank the milk of the she-wolf Lupa in the wild. Like Remus being killed by Romulus, and Abel being killed by Cain, Ymir was killed by the grandchildren of Buri. Since Buri, Bor, and Ymir were all frost giants, I've entertained in this chart the possibility that Surtur, the Norse fire Jotun of the fiery underworld, might represent the third in this dynamic, but this is pure speculation on my part. Tacitus, in his book Germania, reports Manus and Tuisto as ancestors of the Germans. Scholars have since conflated Tuisto with Ymir, since both of their names mean twin, and Manus with Buri or Bor, since they were the first gods and ancestors of the Aesir. Linguists who specialized in Indo-European reconstructed a Proto-Indo-European triad of Mano, Yemo, and Trito by cross-referencing the Norse Germanic Manus and Ymir and others with the Vedic Manu, Yama, and Trita. Their names mean man, twin, and third. Like Ymir and Yama, Yemo is hypothesized to have been sacrificed by Mano in order to create the world. Yemo was then given rulership over the underworld, and Mano rulership over the celestial realm. Trito, meanwhile, supposedly fought a 3-headed serpent to rescue either cattle or a damsel. Aside from the resemblance of Trito and Trita to Thridi, there isn't much here to link Odin, Hœnirand, and Loki to this triad, especially since they more resemble their forebears, Buri and Ymir. Another Proto-Germanic triad was reconstructed directly from Odin, Vili, and Ve, Wodu, Wiljo, and Wihaz. They seem to have referred either to groups of spirits or to spiritual concepts more generally, almost like Numen to the Romans or Mana to the Polynesians. The Wodu resembled the Lóðurr, or the Etruscan Manes, mad spirits flying in the wind. The Wiljo had to do with wishes. I'm imagining the will-o-wisp, also called fairy fire, but I'm not sure what to do with this imagery. And the Wihaz referred to holy sanctuaries, similar to nematons in Celtic religion. I followed this nematon thread to the patroness of nematons, a Gallic tree goddess of sacred groves, Nematona. Her partner was Loketios, associated likewise with sacred groves, but also lightning, and he holds a drum that sounds like thunder. This sent me down another rabbit hole, and I recalled the tree spirit of Yoruba, Iroko, who made a pact with the first priestess, Ayaba, to bring rain. He occupies the world tree alongside the ancestors, and often takes the form of a snake. In voodoo tradition, he has many tree spirits called Loko, which occupy various trees. Like the Wodu and Lóðurr and Manes, their name means crazy. One origin myth of the Hindu fire god Agni is that he emerged from the friction between 2 sacred banyan sticks. This gave me an epiphany. The tree spirit and the fire spirit may be one and the same, because the same spirit is being released when wood is burned. This narrative weaves together Wodu, Wiljo, and Wihaz, Odin, Vili, and Loki very seamlessly. The next set of connections are a bit more of a stretch, admittedly, but I can see something subtle going on that I'd like to share. In Hesiod's theogony, there are 2 out of the 12 Titans who are twins, Koios and Krios. Koios is associated with curiosity and intellect, and his epithet Polus, who sounds like Pollux, yet another divine twin, is associated with the polar axis mundi, and thus with the cold winters. His twin Krios is associated with critique and the equator, and thus with warm summers. I like to think of them as 2 serpentine dragons coiled around the earth, the axis mundi, the world tree, and the caduceus. The motif of a cold and a hot dragon opposed to one another is also shared with Chinese and Mesoamerican myths. Koios, like Hœnirand, is a god of intellect, and like Heimdall, had a key role in ruling or protecting the axis mundi. Krios, like Halogi, is a god of heat, and like Fjalar, we can imagine his critique as a call to action against the Olympian gods. After all, the Titans are to Olympians what the Jotun are to the Aesir. The divine twins of Baltic religion, for instance, are the Dievideli, messenger gods. Like Castor and Pollux, they ride horseback, but like Heimdall, they bridge the gap between the palace of the gods on top of the world tree and the world of humans below. Besides the Dievideli, there is Velnias, also on horseback, ruler of the underworld, guiding lost souls to his realm. Like the Slavic Veles, Velnias musters an army of the dead in the world of the living every Halloween, then leads that army to fight on the winter solstice. Remember how Soltraudur is the rooster who summons the dead to rise in hell? An interesting coincidence there. The Lithuanians depict Velnias as a hero fighting the winter witches, Raganas, to restore the sun to her summer glory. The Slavs depict Veles as a villain, shape-shifting into a giant serpent and climbing the world tree in an attempt to conquer the heavens, only for Perun to thwart his nefarious plans every year. In Norse, it's almost as if Veles had won and became Odin, with his more chthonic trickster aspects being transferred to Loki over time, and with his adversary Förbauti replaced by his own dutiful son, Thor. The last tongue-in-cheek connections that I'd like to make have to do with this association of Odin, Velnias, and Veles with the winter solstice. Of course, it is Odin's job to lead the wild hunt against the wild Odr spirits, riding his 8-legged horse, Sleipnir, and accompanied by his 2 hunting hounds during Yule. Likewise, it is Santa Claus's job to ride his sleigh pulled by 8 reindeer, excluding Rudolph, across the world each Christmas, spreading gifts and goodwill to all. In an American Christmas story, The Year Without a Santa Claus, we might see another freaky parallel between Odin as Santa Claus, Hœnirand, Heimdall, or Koios as the snow miser, and Halogi or Krios as the heat miser. Am I crazy? Tell me in the comments. Thanks for watching.